Recording. Go. There we go. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and children of all ages, welcome to another wonderful episode of the Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. Tonight we are going to be talking about what takes us into the woods. What do we, as myself and Ben, what takes us into the woods? Why do we go in? What do we do when we're there? What's the big draw? Now, that seems to be a question for most people when they want to start adventuring out here, wouldn't you say, Ben?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it's definitely a question you get, and it's especially for anyone who doesn't do it. But it's also just something fun and interesting to talk about. Like, well, what do you really enjoy when you're out there? What makes it different? What makes it exciting, or just healing? Is almost another word you could use for a lot of what we do. I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's it's very therapeutic, regardless of which way you want to look at it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So, do you want to take the lead with this one and
Um, yeah, sure, why not? So, for me, going out in the woods, as I said, it's very therapeutic. Um, I try to get out in the woods to de-stress. I mean, everything that goes on, life, work, house, home, all that good stuff, it all seems to just kind of melt away when you're out in the woods. It's just you, the woods, the air, the stuff around you, and just what you're doing. It to me, it's amazingly therapeutic. It calms me down. It de-stresses me if I've had a hard week or a bad week or something like that. Even if I haven't had a bad week or hard week, it's just I it just kind of resets the odometer, so to speak. That's kind of what it is for me. It's a way just to kind of reset everything inside. I don't know about you, Ben, but something I notice is when I come back, I tend to sleep better when I'm here and I feel more rested, even if I've gotten less sleep when I'm out in the woods. I come back, I'm a lot fresher, a lot more rested. What's your thoughts?
oh, for sure. I mean, yeah, it's one of those things. Like, no matter what's really going on with the rest of your life, you can get out there, you can kind of let all that go, and it kind of melts away, and you can lose yourself in the moment. Whether it's you're going to do a bit of fishing or just walking and just enjoying anything. And I mean, it's the little things, it's the big things, it's the overall package. Uh, I I was thinking about this quite a bit on the ride home from work today, and just thinking about when you're in there and you could be sitting on a rock and you could be looking over at a leaf, and just for some reason that leaf is just perfect, just what you needed to see that day, and you're looking at it and just the shape, maybe a bit of dew coming off of it, or just the sound of a river going by, and it just sort of makes everything else go away for a while and allows you to just center yourself, I think, and find that place that makes everything just so much better. It makes helps everything come together, make more sense, I guess, is almost what I'm feeling. So therapeutic, healing, I think are both great words for it. It's just something that's there's not really a word for it, without getting almost religious about it. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, in a way, it almost is kind of religious. There are a lot of religions that base going out in the woods and doing their thing as part of it. You know what I mean? So saying that it's almost religious is not really far off the mark, in all honesty. Um, yeah, I guess that's all I'll say about that, so I don't tread into deep waters.
Yeah, and I don't, but I think it's a careful. It's a safe subject because regardless of what your beliefs are, it's nature is part of almost any belief of how it come to be or who created it. I mean, and I don't want to tread on anyone's thoughts or beliefs, but it's it's the natural place. It's a place where I think you can go and kind of heal and reflect and be kind of sort of, like I said, center yourself, I guess. But what are the things you do when you're out there? Like I know there's the hunting, the fishing, snaring. Um, Something that I did a lot as a teenager, and I take a book, go in the woods away from everyone, find a nice big rock in the middle of a river, and I'd sit back there for an hour, 2 hours, just reading a book. Water going around either side of the rock, just totally by yourself, and it's just such a calming and restful place to be. Like it made a I don't know. It's Yeah.
There's for anybody that's not been out in the woods, it really is. Once you get out there and you get in the zone, it is kind of hard to describe how it makes you feel. Like I get what you're saying there, Ben. Like it's always seems like it's a loss for words. That was my problem. Like there's no really describing the peacefulness and serenity you can get just by being out in the woods and being connected with nature.
Yeah, and I mean, I think as teenagers, everyone has to go through stuff. It's just trying to find your place in the world and stuff. And sometimes a place you can go to get away from it all and just reflect and stuff. That was a place for me. It was my escape, and it still is. And a really stressful day, it'd be nothing better than go for a walk on a nature trail or throw, cast a line into a river or just take a camera out and take some photos of things. And it's just so nice to get out there. And sometimes you do absolutely nothing. You just walk in and do nothing.
Oh,
Uh,
I've done that tons. Just going for a nature walk. Literally
yeah,
just walk out and look at stuff. I mean,
no,
that's
yeah, yeah, no intent or anything. It's just to see what it'll bring you. And every trip in the woods is a new experience for me. And I think you can't have the same one twice. You can't get two snowflakes that are the same, and you definitely can't get two nature trips that are going to be the same ever.
no, not at all. I mean, there's just so much to do out in the woods. Like, as you were saying, you mentioned a few things there. There's not just the bushcraft aspect, which is what we kind of chat about here, but there's also like the hunting, the fishing, you said, just the nature walk, the photography, just getting away by yourself. Me, when I go into the woods, I tend to either be like camping bushcraft oriented. Even if I go camping, I always tend to bring my bushcrafting background into it. I like to practice my skills. Quite often, I'll start fires with a bow drill or even a ferrocerium rod and a striker, or I'll boil river water or different things like that. Like, I just enjoy getting out, practicing the skills, making sure I don't lose them because, if you don't use it, you lose it. But that's not the sole reason I go out there at all. Sometimes I'm just going out camping. Like Charlie, that happens to be joined in there, him and his wife, they come out with Mel and I to the waterfall every now and then, and we just go out as friends, hang out, and enjoy nature. Uh, there's another feller at work. I won't mention his name because of where we work, but we go out in the woods quite often to go hunting in the early season. There, we're both bow hunters, and we'll just go out in the woods. And I've seen lots of times we've gone into the woods, never even knocked an arrow, honestly, just out for the walk, seeing deer, just kind of like, yeah, okay, maybe next time, and you just keep going. Like, it's not, it's it really is about the experience. Miles, my neighbor here, he just happened to join on. Him and I will head out in the four wheelers. I mean, that's still getting out in the woods. The trails that we got here out behind the house, they go on for like miles or kilometers, whichever way you want to say it. And just the last time him and I went out, we were like 80 kilometers in. It was just great. It was awesome, and it's all still in the woods and in nature, and it's still a great experience. That's the beauty of being out in the woods. It's not any one thing specifically that draws you out there. It's a whole new world, I guess. Does that sound accurate to you, Ben?
Yeah, well, like I said, it's a new adventure every time, and you can't see it all. Like you never can. And I grew up in a small town in Newfoundland, and every day we would go out. Not that we went out absolutely every day, but every time we went out, you'd go somewhere new. You'd explore something. We always found something new, a new place to play, or a new place to hang out, or a new place to build a shelter or a fort, or a new place to go fishing. And it seemed like constant discovery. And you never knew what you were going to discover or how it was going to turn out. And you didn't really go with a plan. We rarely went in the woods with a full plan. We'd often have the fishing rod with the hope to go fishing. Or like you said, sometimes you go hunting, and you might even see something, but that just doesn't really strike your fancy at that moment. You're like, nah, I'll get the next one. Sometimes it's just the enjoyment of watching that animal go through the woods or seeing the birds fly through the trees or whatever it is. There's a million things that make each trip kind of unique and enjoyable. And it is, you slow down and start to really notice those little things. And I think that's the key is it gets you to not only see the little things, but the big things and see everything in between. And it just opens up the whole big picture so much clearer in your mind. Um, and,
I'm
and I,
watching all the things come up in the side of the screen there, so apparently everybody likes us. Thanks, guys. Um,
but but yeah, like I took a tracking course a while back, and one of the things they did, and just kind of the elaborate on what I was saying, they took a pie plate and they cut a 1 inch square out of it, and they had us toss it right in the woods. And you go up to that pie plate wherever it landed and look through that 1 inch square, and you had to draw what you seen in that one single inch. And some people say, oh, you had to draw like what, a little leaf or maybe a single bug or a small rock. But as you got in there and started to see the individual grains of sand and everything, it became like an infinite picture held in that one little square inch. Well, the whole nature is like that. Like everything out there is just full of stuff. And as you start to spend more and more time out there and watching it, and looking at it, seeing how it works, and how the leaves turn in the wind, and how everything interacts with itself, it's just I said it lines everything up in your mind. It really does, and it it makes you feel so much more calm, relaxed, like you said. It really is a very enjoyable and restful and escape. Um, I really can't say much more about it. Like you know,
well, it's true. Like we said back there at the start, it's what it is to you and I won't be what it is to somebody else. It's a very personal experience. There's a lot of similarities. I'm openly admitting that. Don't get me wrong, but I guess the nature experience, quote unquote, it's a very personal thing. There's always something for every individual. Like what I like about nature, you and I, we like a lot of similar things, but I find things in nature that I enjoy that you specifically don't happen to enjoy either. Like Dave Lake here, for instance, he's an avid hunter. He's also a guide. I think I've gave him a shout out in one of our very first videos. But once again, if anybody's looking for a hunting fishing guide, Dave Lake's your guy. Has lots of wicked stories. But I mean, him and I used to hang out as kids in the woods. We built cabins, forts, things like that. And as we got older, it just kind of stuck with us. I went more to the bushcrafting side. He went more to the hunting and outdoorsy side. And I mean, we can still get together and chat about it. I'm sure if Dave and I sat down for a coffee, we would have endless stories we could tell each other. And there are actually a couple really funny ones. If anybody happens to know Dave, or if you see him on there and you want to shoot him a message, ask him about his great bear hunting story. There was actually a video floating around the internet about it, and he probably still has it. You must have seen one of those classic stories where Buddy will be sitting in the tree stand, the bear comes up and basically looks at him. Well, that was Dave. So he's got a plethora of stories, and most of the people that you find that are outdoorsy or woodsy or whatever you want to call it, which is just a loose generic term in my opinion, they always have the best stories. Like you can take the simplest of things and it can go so horrifically wrong that it just makes a great story, and that's the beauty of nature. That's the beauty of being out in the woods. Even if your best laid plans go completely to crap, you still come back with a smile on your face and a great story. You know what I mean? I've never gone out in the woods and come back and be like, I regretted going out today. Never.
yeah,
And I've had some really bad things happen.
yeah. You never say I'm never doing that again.
No, it's what can
Right.
I do different? What can I do? What did I learn? I guess is what I usually tell myself. What did I learn today? I learned what didn't work, that's for sure. But I'm more than
Yeah. So yeah, I'm not wearing that clothes again, or I'm definitely taking a better whatever, right? Or I'm taking more food, or I'm not taking that much food again. I mean, that's when I find I take way too much food. But yeah, every time you go out, it can be such an adventure, a learning experience, and two people could go the same trip, the same time, and they'll both come back with totally different memories. They'll both have seen different animals. They'll both have experienced it in a different way, because it is truly that unique. Where you can't both sit down and watch a movie, you're going to get the same thing out of it pretty close. You know what I mean?
oh yeah.
Things you do that's outside of that's more manufactured, just don't have that purity that I find you get in a good trip. And I mean, like I said, we all look for different things when we go out there, and that's the beauty of it. And you train yourself as you're out there to see different things. And me and you would go, and you'd probably see edible food or plants that I might not see, and vice versa. And you might see a
Don't
river.
ever trust what I think is edible. That's another. Well, actually, no. It's story time. Lots of times I've been out and been like, "Oh yeah, I'm fairly certain you can eat that." You shouldn't have eaten that. I've never actually landed in the hospital, but I think I've pegged myself down to having food poisoning about 22 times.
Wow.
I actually know when I have food poisoning now because I'm so used to it. And it's terrible because I do stupid things. I openly admit it. I'm like, oh, what's the worst that could happen? Well, you get food poisoning. That's the worst that can happen. Well, the worst that can happen is it's poisonous and you die. But I generally do the tasting test. Like you break it open, rub it on your arm, and if you don't, sorry, I just knocked my mic for anybody that was listening there. But you rub it on your arm, and if it doesn't break out in hives, then you take a little bit and you put it in the inside of your lip. And if it doesn't tingle, then you might chew a little bit up and you spit it out. And if it's not so bad, well, you try and eat it. But that doesn't always work for anybody that's thinking, oh, yeah, I'll just do that when I'm out in the woods. You know what? It's a good way to test things, but it's not a good way to guarantee things. Because you can still eat them and have horrific stomach cramps or a really bad case of food poisoning. Or the other one that gave me really bad food poisoning was eating raw fish, because I heard somewhere that you can eat freshwater fish raw and it's perfectly fine for you. It's probably true, but they can also give you food poisoning. So, long story short, always prep your food good.
Yeah, I gotta say, I'm not much for not cooking my fish. A buddy of mine one time told me he was going out with this girl, and he said, I'll have sushi for her. And I said, you know what that says to me? I said, I was too lazy to even cook it for you.
And you know what? The only reason I did it, in all honesty, was I wanted to try. I will try anything at least once if I think it won't kill me. And I was pretty certain eating raw fish wouldn't kill me because you have sushi. And like I said, I had heard somewhere and it was in the back of my mind, oh no, you can eat freshwater fish. It's fine. It's perfectly good. Well, there might be some truth to that. It won't kill you, but you can still get food poisoning out of it.
Now, a quick note to throw out there about your testing of food, and I can't, I mean, I think you probably said the name of the test, but there's a whole process. You can look it up. It's really very interesting. But one of the things they push about it is if you're going to go through this, because to properly fully do a test to see if something is poisonous, I think it takes close to 24 hours.
48 is what I've always
40,
gone with. Yep.
yeah. So this is a time-consuming and therefore an expensive process.
Mm-hmm.
They say if you're going to do it, make sure you're doing it with something that you have large quantities that you can harvest. So if you find a plant that you think might be edible, but there's only like 4 or 5 of them, as much as you can see, it's probably not worth going through the process for it. Like,
Yeah, because it'd be a waste of time at the end of it, I suppose. You wouldn't have enough of it to even matter.
but if it's something that there's like thousands of this plant around and there's large quantity of it and you can harvest large quantities of it in a relatively short period of time, something that maybe resembles a nut or whatever, then that's definitely a process that's worthy of using for a long-term survival method, right?
And I get thinking about it now, and I think you are right. I think technically the test is only 24 hours. I allow, generally, if I'm going to do it right, I
Yeah.
allow 48 hours because what it is the arm test, or back of the hand test, arm test, lip test,
Yeah.
in your mouth test, and then you eat a small amount. You're supposed to wait 24 hours to see if you have an adverse reaction to it. I
Yeah.
generally do that twice, but that's just me. Because, I mean, you know yourself, medically wise, nobody's ever allergic to anything the first time. It takes an accumulative effect before you'll start getting like an actual allergic reaction. So anaphylaxis, stuff like that. Like nobody's allergic to nuts the first time unless they were born with the allergy. But even then, they never usually go into anaphylactic shock or anything like that. It's always a couple times in. So I always like to try and give myself the 2 times in case the first time my body was like, whoa, okay, that was weird, and just decide to get rid of it. The second time, generally, I'll get stomach cramps or something like that I didn't get the first time. And I'd rather only have a little bit off it than eat like a meal with this stuff and find out that it's literally going to tear me apart, right? So,
Yeah.
but
I mean, that kind of brings us into, because we're talking about it anyways, one of the things that I did a lot growing up, and we did it as families, was berry picking, gathering wild edibles that we knew of. And I mean, back home, blueberries, raspberries, partridge berries, what we called cloudberries, were all very somewhat common back home. And we've
A
Yeah,
cloudberry, would that be a gooseberry?
cloudberry. No, you can get it at IKEA actually. Um,
Okay.
it's it looks like a raspberry. It's very small, grows mainly in bogs, and they grow fairly low to the ground, and they're very time consuming to pick. Um, Usually, when my parents went picking them, they wouldn't take us. They don't tend to grow here. They grow in Newfoundland. They grow up in Labrador, I believe, and they're fairly common in the Netherlands, which and Sweden. So if you're ever in there, I think they call it's cloudberry. There's another name on it. Bake apple was the other one we call it, bake apple jam. Um, but it's an interesting one. But these are ones that grew up where I grew up. Now here, um, you got cranberries. You can get wild cranberries. Not so common back home, but very common to the partridge berries that we used to grow up and get growing up. So those were things that we would often pick and stuff. And that's we spent a lot of time picking, especially blueberries, because they were very common where I grew up.
And look at Nova Scotia. I mean, we're polluted in blueberries a lot of the time, right?
Yeah,
Oxford.
yeah, moderate amount, but not, yeah, and they're great for anyone that's recently experienced a forest fire. Usually, that's one of the first plants that grows back up is
Oh,
blueberries.
for sure. And lab tea. Pitcher plants
Yes,
and lab tea are the other ones that come up fairly regularly, and we can do a show on that alone. Lab tea, ladies and gentlemen, for anybody that's wondering, it's a plant that's kind of furry on the bottom, and you can literally make it into tea, and it's pretty decent.
yeah. I think I've only done it a couple of times, but yeah, no, it's yeah, we could do a whole one on teas. I got a couple of edible wild books, and you can go through it, and it's shocking how many plants can be turned into teas. Um, But yeah, so I mean that's a really good one for you to out. Like I said, we mentioned your standard, your hunting, fishing. We spent a lot of time snaring growing up, looking for rabbit trails and stuff. And I think that was a fairly common thing for a lot of young adults when I was growing up, and I assume probably was here, but I think it's died off. I don't think there's a lot of people that snare anymore.
Uh, Growing up, I know we did a pile of it, didn't we, Dave? I can still remember. We were in Marigamish. Do you know where that's at by any chance, Ben?
Not really, but
Okay, so it's
I,
halfway between New Glasgow and Antigonish on the Sunrise
okay,
Trail.
yeah,
But I just happen to be picking on Dave because I know he's here to defend himself if he's still in the chat there anyway. But we used to go out a ton and do snaring and hunting rabbits and squirrels because you used to be able to sell the squirrel tails to people that would tie flies.
oh yeah,
So you get a lot of those. Pheasants were another one. If you could catch a pheasant, they'd always look for the hackle off
oh yeah.
that. But yeah, that was something we did as a kid. That was a prime reason to get out in the woods was you could make a little money. Mind you, we never got rich. Don't get me wrong. You got like 50 cents a squirrel tail and maybe $5 for the hackle off a pheasant.
Yeah.
But it was a reason to get out more than anything. And I mean, we always ate anything we shot.
Yeah.
I don't know if Dave ever ate the squirrels, but I know I have a couple times. And anybody that's wondering, it's kind of like chewy turkey. So
At least you didn't say chicken, right?
it's not like chicken.
Yeah. Um, I, we spent a lot, especially kids, when we found a couple of frog ponds too. I think we probably emptied a few frog ponds of frogs. There's that kind of activity too, right? And I don't know how much time we spent just making shelters, or as we called them at the time, forts.
Mm.
Which is a great pastime if you want to get out and play, pretend to be a kid again. I mean, it is a lot of fun to just go back and knock a couple of trees up against each other and
I still
shelter.
love making shelters.
Yeah,
I smiled there because I'm thinking of all the, oh, would you even dare to call them camps that we used to make, the Shore Road crew down there, Dave included. We built some interesting things. We actually had natural resources come in and put the this building has to be removed sticker on one of them. And we were pretty sure it was actually on one of the guys that we hung out with's property was the kind of catchy thing on that. So, but anyway,
yeah.
and Dave has tried porcupine once. What was that like, Dave? I've never tried porcupine. I heard the meat's kind of orange. Any truth to that? I'll wait for his comment. But yeah, it was down, still Marigamish, but it was the Piedmont Valley Road. There was a feller down there named Steven. And in behind his house, everybody built this camp.
Yeah.
And it was there for quite a while. And I don't get me wrong, this wasn't your typical shelter camp to be sure. There was plywood and stuff involved. But anyway, we arrived down there one night to probably do stuff we weren't supposed to be doing at the time. But anyway, there's this big yellow notice, like, you got 30 days to remove your stuff from the premises, and then we're going to burn the thing down, basically. So that was always a good experience. I don't know if anybody else has ever experienced that, but tree houses.
Yeah, see, we didn't have that problem back home. In fact, the cabin my parents built, we literally went in the woods and chose a spot of land and built a cabin there. And my aunt built one next to us, and there was a whole bunch of them. It wasn't years, I mean, a lot of years later, the local paper company came by and they're like, we technically own this land. Like, we'd like some money for this. And people are like, oh, what would you want? And they're like, I have $50 a year. And people are like, that's ridiculous. And then eventually they did pay it. I think it went up a little bit, but it was years that nobody, stops. It was totally different growing up back in Newfoundland compared to here. Like, I've heard of this, the sticker and getting camps burned down. Everyone I knew had camps in the woods and shacks and buildings and stuff. And
Well, what happened here a lot in Nova Scotia was you would get what's called a campsite lease. If you wanted to build a camp on Crown land, and this was years ago now, they no longer do the practice, but you used to be able to go into Natural Resources, say, look, I want to build a camp here, and they would basically lease you the land, and it was like $1 a year or something, right? It was just paperwork to say, yes, we know you're there, and yes, you're giving us something in return. And I think once a year they'd go out, inspect it to make sure it wasn't an eyesore or a fire hazard, and then you'd be good.
yeah,
Now, since when I worked with Natural Resources, no longer could you get a campsite lease. It was not a thing. They still did the inspections and stuff like that, but there was no possible way you were going to get a new campsite lease. So I don't know what, or even if there's a process to do it now in Nova Scotia, unless you go out and buy the land, which is kind of a bugger, because, I mean, I guess Crown land, in my opinion, has always been for the public. And I mean, if you're erecting a giant permanent structure, I could kind of see the problem. But if you're out just doing bushcraft or building shelters or surviving and stuff like that, I know a handful of people that literally just little lean-to shelters they've built, they've been tagged and told they had to vacate and they were going to burn them down and stuff like that. Like, it's kind of just a pain in the butt. I mean, I don't see the reason for it, and I used to work for Natural Resources. Not knocking on Natural Resources. I'm sure there's a policy, and they're just doing their job, yada, 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 and all is good. We go on our merry way, but...
their job, but it's kind of frustrating, and we're a little off topic, but I like it. It's because really a lot of us, I'm sure, think of going out in the woods and just disappearing sometimes, and really, we've created a world now where you can't do that. You just can't go in the woods and say, I'm not coming back out. I'm going to live there. Because they will find your building and they'll burn it down.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like,
you have to move it.
I remember one of the things I used to do was literally you would jump in the helicopter and you'd take off from Shubenacadie and you would just fly around and look for illegal structures. That was your job for the day. And you'd tag them on the GPS and you'd go back and you'd give it to whoever concerned, and they'd be the ones that would drive out and basically ruin that person's day. And I mean, it's not glamorous, don't get me wrong. I didn't necessarily agree with it, but at the time it was my job and that's what I did, right?
Yeah.
So, but I know that process probably still goes on.
Oh, I'm sure to varying degrees, yeah. But I mean, most of us are really sneaky and we'd be able to make them invisible, right? Like, you wouldn't see them.
Yeah. I was just responding to Dave there. After the one that got tore down behind Steve's house, we actually ended up building one not very far away in a gravel pit. But that was private land. Private land. We went to school with the fellow whose father owned it, if that makes any kind of sense. His father owned it. We built it there, so
Yeah.
DNR never really bothered us again on it. But we'll have to go out and check that sometime, Dave. I'll take the 4-wheeler down. We'll go for a rip and see if that one's still standing.
Yeah, I remember my cousin had built one right on the river, him and his friends, and we went out and visited a few times over the years. And later on, an outfitting camp or company had built a camp next to it. And last time I was out there was still some standing parts of it left, which was probably well over 25 years since it had been built. And it was just built from logs that they cut in there and nailed together. Like it was, but it was a log cabin with, I don't know, 4 or 5 beds in it and windows and doors. It was pretty neat. Good job for a bunch of teenagers just trying to get away.
I mean, that's what it's all about. That's just getting out into the woods and enjoying it, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly what we're talking about. Why do you go out? Wanted to build a camp and hang out. I mean, as teenagers, like I was taught, I keep bringing Dave in once again because he's on the chat with us and he can pipe up if he doesn't like it. Uh, I mean, we'd go out, not necessarily doing the best of things, but we never really hurt anyone. We weren't, there was no real harm involved. Like, uh, I'm trying to think how to word all this without getting too into it. But I mean, we'll call it what it was. I mean, we'd go out and have a few drinks. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Or something like that out in the woods. We weren't hurting nobody. We didn't have any rip roaring fires. 9 times out of 10, we never had a fire at all. Because we knew we'd burn the woods down and nobody wants that. So we'd just build a little camp. We'd might have like some flashlights or an old lantern or something like that. We'd have a few wobbly pops and have a bunch of laughs. I mean, at the time we were somewhere between 16 and 18, let's say. And it was perfectly harmless at the time, minus the perhaps drinking underage, but a different time at the same time. You know what I mean? I do not condone anyone going out and underage drinking.
No, we at Atlantic Bushcraft do not condone breaking the law.
Exactly.
But I mean, we used to go. I can't imagine. I couldn't number the days we would go out swimming. And there's a lot of beautiful, clear rivers around where I grew up, and that was one of our favorite things to go out. And we had found quite a few nice swimming holes, spots where the rivers had cut nice and deep, and you had spots to go. And we had rocks that went way up, like we could jump 20, 25 feet off cliffs into the water and have 10, 12, 18 feet of depth. And I remember another spot. There was 3 sets of falls, and each at the bottom of each of the falls there was like a pool that you could swim in, and it was just awesome. And you could go out there, and I could have that whole river to myself, just me, or just me and one other person, and we could go down there. You could sit in the water, and you could swim. We could take the fishing rod and catch a few fish, and we'd make a day of it. Sometimes take a picnic or a lunch, have a small fire, and it was probably some of the most enjoyable, memorable times of my life. Like, especially growing up, like can't knock it, right?
No, and I mean, they're all reasons to go into the woods, which is our topic here. I mean, there is no one reason to go out into the woods. That's the beauty of it. There is numbers of reasons. There's no reason not to go in the woods unless you're terrified of something that's in the woods. And I mean, that could be just lack of education, or you legitimately have a phobia, which, I mean, if that's what it is, that's what it is. There's really not a reason to at least go out and just go for a nature walk. There's lots of walking trails in Nova Scotia. There's tons of them in national or not well provincial parks for sure, and I'm sure the national parks must have plethoras of nice
Oh yeah.
walking trails. So I mean, there's really no reason not to get out and at least experience it a little bit. I when we lived in Halifax back in 2005, it was the first time I had been in a city, in all honesty, and met people that are like, "Oh, I've never been in the woods." And I'm like, "Oh, you mean you've just never been in the deep woods?" They're like, "No, we've never been out of the city." And I'm like, "What do you mean you've never been out of the city? Like that's blasphemy!" Like, but no,
Yeah.
there is literally people out there. They're just like, "No, we've never been in the woods," and that means they've never left the cement jungle, which just astounds me.
Oh, I did security, and one of the other security guards that I worked with told me he had never left Halifax. Not HRM, Halifax. He'd never left. He only had one family member even had a driver's license. He said they took buses everywhere they needed. They were able to find employment from there. They never had to leave the city of Halifax. Maybe went to Dartmouth, when they were going crazy.
But you still had the bus to get across there. And I mean, I'm not picking on Melissa at all. I know she's on here too, but when we lived in the city, it was much the same. She never really had a reason to get her license. The bus, we were students at the time, so you bought your student bus pass, which I think those days it might have been like $20, 15, $20. And you had
Okay.
unlimited traveling anywhere.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? So why would you get your license? Like, I understand it, but how can you go your entire life as an adult? These people were 20 to 30 and never have been in the woods. And I'm not talking like the deep woods out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, they've never set foot in a park. They didn't know what trees looked like in a bunch. So it's just weird. it's just weird. To me, like, why, how, why would you ever do that to yourself? You're denying such a wonderful experience, in my opinion.
Well, like I mean, the joke for me growing up was you had to come out to hunt because we were so far back there, and I lived in a community of less than 1,000 people most of the time. So that's where we spent a lot of our time. Everyone had ATVs, everyone had snowmobiles, everyone did ice fishing. Everyone went blueberry picking. Like it was a common thing, and it was a way of life for us. But yeah, the first few times I met people who'd never really spent time in the woods, and to hear them talk about, oh, aren't you scared of the wolves or the bears or this or that? And I'm like, I rarely see any of these things. And even when I do, like I've never felt threatened. And that's a question I kind of got. Have you really ever felt overly threatened by anything in the woods?
Okay, at the risk of making a bad comment, I feel more at risk in downtown Halifax than I ever have in any part of the woods in Canada.
Oh yeah,
Like
yeah,
100%.
I 100% agree with you. People freak me right out.
Well, I mean, they're just more dangerous areas in my mind. Like, they're dangerous areas. When you're out in the woods, I mean, the animals are just doing their thing. You stay out of their way, they'll stay out of your way. Like bear attacks and things like that. There's usually always a factor that leads to a black bear attack, for instance, in Nova Scotia. Um, Curiosity, cubs, early springs, things like that. Because 9 times out of 10, I don't know about you, have you ever met a black bear in the woods?
Yes.
I have once. And I mean, I made a career for, I think it was 12 years, I figured it out, of walking around in the woods. And I've met one black bear. And it was just after the spring hibernation. And I mean, the second he seen me, gone. Just
Oh yeah.
like a shot.
I could probably count on one hand the number of times I've seen them. Maybe a bit more. But usually it is, them walking away or running away. They've never really been threatening. I might see them across a bog or a field, and they've rarely ever paid any amount of attention to me. There was really no foxes and stuff growing up, but not much in the way of. In Newfoundland, there was very little that I think could harm you.
Well,
Moose was probably the most dangerous thing.
oh man, I didn't really run into it. I seen it off in the distance in the Cape Breton Highlands. And that was the only time I was actually nervous in the woods. Because it
But
was,
even then, well, we had a pet caribou in my town. Like it wandered down one time. I'm not joking. Look it up. Clarence the caribou. It was on Wayne Rostan's.
okay, I gotta look that up now. Clarence the caribou?
Caribou. This is a real thing. I
Oh
can't
no,
make this.
I don't doubt you. I want to throw a picture up.
But it wandered into town one time, and it never left for 2 or 3 years. And eventually, it did disappear. But we used to walk around town. We used to put it in tennis court in the winter and bring it molasses bread and stuff, and some cabbage or something, and it's a great bit of fun. But that's how far we were so used to seeing these animals. They were everywhere all the time, that it was almost second nature to us. But you mentioned being scared to say. I lived in 3 different cities. I've lived in St. John's, I've lived in Halifax, Dartmouth, and I've lived in Winnipeg over the years. And when I lived in Winnipeg, I was a little more than a teenager. I had a motorcycle, and I can remember, and I never really had a bad experience, but I can remember I was driving down a bad part of town one time, and I parked at a set of lights, and there was these guys that looked like they might be part of a gang, and there was a couple of rough characters from the other side that just looked like they could be up to no good, and they were both walking across the street. And they were kind of looking at me, and the lights were red, and I panicked, and I said, there's nothing coming, but those guys freaked me out. I got no locks, nothing I can, and I gunned her through a set of red lights. So I've definitely felt more nervous in cities than I have ever in the woods.
For sure.
And I've put myself in some dangerous situations. Did you find them?
I did. At the risk of not stealing anyone's photos, I'm just going to tell everybody, just Google Clarence the caribou, and there is a plethora of stuff there. There's even songs written about him. That's what I was giggling about while you were talking.
Yeah.
Dave had a couple good points here. One of the ones that I liked that he really said was, you can read a bear, but you can't read people. And I can't agree with that more. Like, animals are, I don't want to say they're simple, but I understand animals better than people. I can read and predict animals way better than I can predict people, because people are so shifty. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean people are moody. Like, it's human nature. You can flip a switch and you don't know what that person's going to do. Animals always tend to, like, yes, they're wild creatures, and I'm not telling anyone to go up and pet the coyotes, but they all have tendencies. You know what I mean? They
Oh
tend
yeah.
to stick to their tendencies.
Yeah, I mean, we trained a lot of animals, and if you're gonna attempt that, just do it with small animals. Like gray jays are what we often trained, and you feed them slowly.
What's a
You
gray
never
jay?
done? You
I've
know,
never heard the term.
whiskey jack.
Nope, you still got me lost.
Oh man, I'm not making this stuff up.
No,
It's a
no, I
little,
know you're not. I mean,
it's a blackish bird, black and gray. Looks like a blue jay almost, but it's gray. Uh, we call them all whiskey jacks. Was another name on them, but small bird, smaller than a crow, and if you're in the woods, they tell on you. They're very sneaky.
oh, I think I know what you're talking about. They're the ones
Like
that are
white
always,
nest.
yeah.
Yeah, we call them gray jays. I don't know what they're technically. I'm sure if you Google gray jay, it would come up though.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what they're called. I mean, they probably have a name this long in the Latin tongue, but I
Oh
think
yeah,
they are actually called gray jays. I just never actually knew what they were called. They're kind of a smaller bird,
yeah.
gray, fluffy, white head, or
I'm
white-ish head, or bands, or something like that.
very intelligent animal, like, extremely intelligent. And if you take some time, and it's one of the few animals that have ever attacked me, by the way. But if you take your time, and I'll tell that story because it's hilarious. But you take your time, you take some bread and stuff, put on like a rail, and you sit next to it, and don't move. Let them land near you, and eat the food. As long as you don't make any sudden movements, he'll come closer and closer, and eventually you can put it in your hand. He'll land in your hand. He'll eat off your hand. Eventually, he'll sit on your shoulder. You can train these things to just think of you as another tree almost, and eventually you can move a little bit. Again, no sudden movements, but eventually you can train these things. Anyways, we did this a lot growing up. We fed them, we trained them, and I think they can see color. I don't know, but they associate it white because mainly we fed them bread with being fed. So I was at my grandparents' cabin one time, and I had a hoodie on under my jacket, and the hoodie had a white hood on it, and it was stuck out of my jacket, so you could see it on either side of my shoulders. And I'm walking down this path, and here's a gray jay looking up at me, and he jumps out of the tree, and he makes a dive bomb straight for my face. So I dropped to the ground, boom, flat as I could. He went like up into the next tree. So I get up and I'm looking at him. I'm like, gee, that was weird. I've never had that happen again. Right back down, straight at me. He did this 3 times in a row, like just dive bomb straight for my face. Like he's gonna hit me right in the eyes if I didn't dive. And on the third one, I'm like, enough of this, and I ran into my grandparents' cabin, and my grandparents are looking at me like, what was that all about? Anyways, it never happened again. But that's what all we could figure is he was going for the hood, or he seemed
Yeah.
to be going to try and snatch it. So for me, it looked like he was going straight for my face.
Funny enough, you're talking about bird attacking stories. The only time I've actually been, I'm going to say actually beaten up by a bird, we had a Canadian goose in a culvert that had to come out.
Yeah.
And old Robert thought it'd be a good idea to go in the culvert after the goose. And don't get me wrong, I have scooped up bald eagles. Dave can attest to this one. We found a bald eagle on Big Island and it had eaten some bad billfish that had come in and got mercury poisoning. We actually carried this thing home. A full-size bald eagle, young one, but I mean, its wingspan was still like 5.5 feet. Great big bird. And I've carried
Yeah.
this thing home. And you know what? The Canadian goose gave me a way bigger butt kicking than that eagle probably ever would. Because the eagle just like claw you and be on about its business. The goose is relentless. They will not give up. Like, you can try and run from a goose. They will find you. They will hiss at you. And then they will attack you. Like, it's no joke. If you want to have some laughs, just YouTube, like, Canadian goose attacks. These things are just, they're evil creatures.
I've heard of them taking people off horses. I've heard of them breaking people's arms and legs. Like they have strong wings. They have a powerful beak, and they will peck at you. They will swing at you if you're threatening them. And they're not going to attack you unprovoked. Like you chase this thing into a culvert.
It was in the culvert I wanted to come out. Let's be clear.
Yeah.
I didn't chase it into the culvert. I was stupid enough to go into the culvert with it.
Yes, right. But it took this as you cornering it. Like you made the mistake from his point of view,
Oh yeah, for
right?
sure. I mean,
Like,
I was in the wrong, 100%. I do not believe if I had just driven by, that goose would have attacked me.
and he would have got out on his own, most likely.
He had made it was a her and I made a nest in there is what the problem was. So I kind of double screwed myself in all honesty because once I got into the back of it, I realized it had a nest. And if
Yeah.
Matthew Balger ever happens to come on, he can attest to the story. It was just terrible. I mean, the only bird I will never walk up and attempt to wrangle is a Canadian goose at this point. I mean, I've caught 6, 7 bald eagles. And I mean, as long as you keep the beak away, they're actually a pretty reasonable animal.
Yeah.
Goose, you can't keep the beak away. You can't. That long neck on the thing, like it'll just wrap itself in a knot and turn around and start biting at you. Like they are just terrible. Oh, you still
Uh,
got the pics, Dave? I'd love to see the pictures if you still have them, buddy. I'll put them up on the website. Dave still has pictures of when we grabbed that bald eagle.
oh yeah, cool.
So
No, definitely get those up there. But yeah, I've heard that actually, if you want to keep your property safe, a handful of geese is the way to go. Way better than attack dogs.
they
Uh,
they are very territorial,
yeah.
and you said they normally don't attack people. They will if you get in their territory. They especially if they're nesting. They will go after you, and you don't have to be near their nest. You just have to be in what they have designated their territory, and they'll do the old run. Like you'll see them drop their head and run at you like a torpedo and try and hiss and snap at you. But they're an interesting bird. If anybody wants to know what it's like to fight a goose, go find the biggest turkey you can and slap it, and you're pretty much right on par.
Oh,
I'm not
yeah,
condoning slapping turkeys. Let's be clear, but I mean that's the only thing I can think that would be the equivalent.
no. I mean, yeah. I mean, any wild animal has its risks, and they definitely deserve every bit of respect you can give them. That being said, generally, if you haven't cornered them, you're not threatening their young, you're not pushing yourself. Well, I think we froze a bit. But yeah,
Maybe. No, it's still
if
scrolling on my side.
no. If you don't, you're not pushing yourself onto them, then generally they'll ignore you. They'll leave you alone. Uh, give them respect. Give them some room. Enjoy them from afar. It's the best way. Um, and be careful. But like I said, I've rarely ever felt threatened unless I've done something a little foolish. The closest thing I have to yours, and I think I may have mentioned before, I did catch a beaver one time, brought it home.
Ooh, those are nasty animals too. I've heard some nasty stories about those.
Yeah, they smell a lot when they shit in your van too. But but yeah, I mean, actually, we caught it in a cage. It was running through town. We brought it home, and had no real trouble. But I definitely wasn't putting my hand in the cage with it. Uh, I think over time, and it kind of got used to you probably could have. But honestly, the Department of Wildlife will definitely come see you and take the animal away and have words with you. So I highly recommend, if you don't like long conversations with authority figures, don't do that.
And that's what happened with the eagle. We called them. They came and took it. But I mean, we digressed a little bit and we had some fun stories. But main point is, if you're not going out into the woods because of wildlife, there are safe ways of going out and enjoying nature, not having any problems with wildlife. Any problems that people have with wildlife, generally, from my experience, it's because they done something they shouldn't have with the animal. I crawled into a culvert after one. Don't do that. That's dumb. Like, I mean, I was getting paid to do it, so I did it anyway. But I mean, it's not a good idea. It's not a good idea to try and pet a beaver, or it's not a good idea to grab an eagle and carry it home. Like, yes, these things have been done, and you see pictures and videos of it, and it's successful, and everything's great. But the problem is, those can go desperately wrong, and that's where you run into the problems. So if you do have that kind of, hey Randall, Randall just decided to join us as we're wrapping up, but it's always good to see him. Sorry, getting back to it. Don't fear the wildlife. Respect the wildlife going out into the woods. That, I guess, that's the bottom line of this. Would you agree, Ben?
Yeah, the only thing I kind of, as you're talking, try not to feed the wildlife. They're out there. It's their environment. They're generally perfectly capable of feeding themselves. But what you do when you feed an animal is, A, you're attracting them to you. They're looking at you as now a food source, and you can actually do more harm for the most part than good. In your backyard, if you have a bird feeder out, that's one thing, I guess. But the reality is, uh, to talk about a lot with bears. Some people decide to feed the bears. They think that's great fun to watch the bear come up and eat, and it can be a big issue, and it does drag them around
I
where
was
you've
about
done.
to say that's where you start running into complications with wildlife. They know you as giving food. They want food. They're going to get it from you. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like they're not meaning to hurt you. They just want the food, and you have given them food in the past, and now they want it.
And it
So
takes away their natural fear of people,
exactly,
which
and it takes away their skills of gathering their own food.
yeah,
Why are bears so fat and lazy now? Because green bins. They're great for us. I mean, we're saving a lot of stuff, but at the same time, it's an easy meal. Bears are lazy by nature. They're not going to go and foraging in the woods if they can go to the end of your driveway, tip over your green bin, fill themselves up, and wander off into the woods to go to sleep. I mean,
yeah,
most animals are lazy by nature and will take the easy meal. And don't confuse lazy by nature with unresponsive. Trust me, they'll still chase you if they feel threatened or something like that. And that's another prime reason not to feed them. Just because you're feeding them doesn't mean you're making them docile. It just means they're taking in calories, which is basically what a bear does right from the time it wakes up from hibernation until the time it goes into hibernation. It's preparing to hibernate again. It's got to build those calories. It's got to get that fat. And they're just looking for easy meals. So yeah, they might be calm and sitting there and eating, but at the second they feel like you're threatening them or you're going to take away from their food supply, they could turn on you just like that, right? And that's the third time I snapped my fingers this show, so I'm on a roll.
oh man, yeah. So I guess we'll wrap it up a little bit though. What do you do when you're out there? I mean, it's really up to you, but get out there, have fun. Practice your bushcraft skills. Take your knife out, carve some things. Take your fishing rod, fish some things. Take your camera, take some photos. Take a small container and gather some food. Um, Pick up a book on wild edibles and just go in and try to identify them. I'm not saying eat anything.
Don't try to eat until you're sure.
Tell you sure, but practice identifying plants, animals, birds, whatever you can. There's so much to do. There's so much to enjoy, and every time you go out there, you will learn something new. You will get a new experience out of it, and generally, I think you'll come away a better person because of it. So, I mean, it's all win. Like, get out there, learn, grow, uh, heal. You know, get some of that stress from your everyday life. I mean, we all have ups and down days. Today for me was a day of huge ups and huge downs. Driving home, it was rainy, miserable, and I really kind of wanted to get out. And this is the closest thing I get some days, right? But I'm definitely going to hit something this weekend. I'm definitely going to get out and do some hiking or do something. I got to get out and sort of blow some of that steam off and do something. Like, get a compass and practice orienteering. Whatever you want
Those
to
are
do.
great skills to practice on. You'll never go wrong practicing your map and compass.
Yeah. And you know, the the sky's the limit. What you can do, but do get out there, learn something new, enjoy it. We've barely touched the tip of the iceberg on things you can do. I mean, we never even got into water sports really, getting out there with canoes and kayaks and things you can do. But is there anything you'd like to throw out that you could do? I mean, I think we've.
No, I mean, this whole show has been most of us just telling stories and stuff, which is exactly how we pegged it out. We've been chatting with Dave and a few others there on the left, and I say left because that's where it is on my screen. But what do you do in the woods? What can you not do in the woods? Like, the possibilities are endless. Your imagination is literally your own limitation. There is, my opinion, and I'm very passionate about it, is there is no reason not to go in the woods and at least try something. Something that you can do at home, you can do in the woods. It might not be as convenient, but I bet you'll enjoy it a lot more.
Oh yeah.
Something as simple as reading a book. And Dave's making a comment there about friending bears. And yeah, and once again, people that are out in the woods and have the comfort to be able to do this stuff, have at her. I don't think I'm going to try and make friends with George the bear. And Dave admits himself it's not a good idea, but it's generally getting back to the animal thing just to wrap it up. Just because you see it on the internet doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea. You don't know the circumstances that are going into what you see on the internet, nor the skill set or the training set behind the person that might be doing said action on the internet. So Ben and I have actually been working on a little disclaimer for our outro here, but I'm just going to throw it in now. Is basically don't do anything that could potentially get you hurt. We don't want anybody doing that. Do your research, get your training, get some experience. You make your own judgments. Don't take anything that we've talked about or anything like that to heart and go out and say, oh, Rob and Ben said I could go pet the beavers. Like, no, we're not telling you to go pet the beavers. We're telling you to have a healthy respect for wildlife, but you don't need to necessarily fear wildlife. Get out and enjoy the woods. That's what Rob and Ben are telling you to do, is get out and enjoy the woods as safely and as responsibly as you possibly can.
And pack your garbage out when you come. Don't leave
Leave
it.
no trace. I love that.
Yeah.
But sorry, go ahead, Ben.
No, that's kind of what I was saying. Like that's a big thing. Like leave the environment in as good a condition or better than when you went in. If you can, take someone else's garbage out if you find it, right? But don't if you're strong enough to carry it in, you're strong enough to carry it out.
100%.
Yeah.
But anyway, good spot for us to wrap it up. It's just 9:30, so thank you everybody for joining in. We actually had a pretty good turnout here, and I got to pick on Dave, which is always a good night. Thanks everybody for joining us. It's been a pleasure. Hopefully we'll see you again, and we hope you all have a good night.
Night off.
See you guys.